Yeah, I mentioned earlier that my feelings and thoughts on this subject, on Frank's homophobic views, has been shaped and reshaped a number of times through my read throughs of the book, through our own conversations on this show, through the research that you and I have done together, through conversations I've had with other Dune fans.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think the more where I'm at now, and again, this could be reshaped again in 6 months if I learn something different or new. Where I'm at now, it seems pretty clear to me that Frank had particular views about homosexuality. They were
Hmm.
problematic and hurtful views. They were ignorant views. And he wrote about those views in his story.
Yeah,
We talked about in the first interviews with Frank episode how he was a man who wrote stories with conviction. He looked at ecological issues, political issues of his time, and said, I can write about this, and maybe people will take some of these lessons to heart.
right.
I think he also took a look at homosexuality in his time and decided, I have thoughts on this. I'm going to write about this. And so I back in our God Emperor conversations, I had felt a little differently. Back then, I had said, I had kind of landed in this softer spot where I was like, well, by this point, by God Emperor, he's a really famous author and probably just got to like write whatever weird thoughts he had in his head and publish them. And a stronger editor might have kept him in check and helped
Sure.
him clarify his ideas and get things across in a better way, in a less problematic way. I don't know that I still think that anymore. I think this is actually what he wanted to get across and was trying to write. And the most damning reason for that is because of that Moneo quote that is practically one for one what Frank says in response to this UCLA student. And again, if you consider timeline, this UCLA tape was recorded after Chapter House came out, which is years after God Emperor came out, which is years after Moneo said those words and Frank put them to paper. Many years in which Frank could have seemingly grown or evolved his own understanding of homosexuality, and it appears chose not to.
Right.
It appears what Moneo said is what Frank still thought in 1985, based on his response here. Now, to be clear, I'm coming down kind of harsh, of course. And, this is somewhat of a different opinion that I had in the God Emperor conversations in the book club back then. But the thing I still stand by, and I said this in the book club series, I'm not trying to cancel Frank Herbert or anything. I'm not trying to label him as some sort of raging homophobe who hated gay people. And I'm not trying to tarnish or blow up his legacy in any way. That's not my job to do that. And it's not my intention to do. Oops. And it's not my intention to do that in any way. His stories still mean the world to me. I still greatly admire his work. I still am incredibly impressed by his talents and his mind. But at the same time, I'm at the point now where I'm not feeling like I need to brush his, what to me feels like clearly homophobic ideas and this mountain of evidence that point toward that, all the compasses are pointing north, under the rug. Like, I don't feel like I need to brush that under the rug. And to sort of sum up my thoughts, I guess, like you mentioned it earlier, human beings are complicated people. That's a
Hmm.
fact. And where I kind of land is, even for his time, even for 1985, it appears Frank had homophobic views. And at the same time, he also wrote these iconic and incredible stories that are full of shockingly progressive ideas on everything from politics to religion to social issues. And it's tough because those feel like opposite things. We want our heroes to be monoliths, we want them to
Sure.
be these
Yeah.
admirable characters that are icons of perfection.
Sure.
But I think both of those things can be true, and in this case, I think they are. he wrote about harmful and ignorant ideas he had about homosexuality in his books. He also wrote about deeply progressive and shockingly prescient ideas about ecology and politics and religion in his books too. And for me, both of those things are true. So I think that's kind of where I land. It goes back to a larger like art versus artist debate that I don't think we have time to get into here, but
sure.
That's kind of where I land. Frank, messy person, had some shitty views, wrote about them, but also wrote an amazing story that I still love deeply and admire.
Yeah.
What about you?
Yeah. I think it's clear to me. I fully agree that, Frank was someone who believed strongly in social change and used his novels as a means of leveraging what he did to sway people toward maybe more ecological or more anti-establishment or more, anti-institutional views. I also think Frank was deeply interested in the psychology and the philosophy of gender and of men and women, and what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be a woman, and all of that. Of course, I would be very curious to see what kind of book Frank would write in 2030, as we continue to have these conversations about trans rights and people, and breaking down that binary a little bit more, because again, so much of it's Paul in Dune sees where men are and where women are, and it's just this very clear binary in Frank's world.
Yeah, definitely.
Very interesting. But I also see that as part of the overall pattern of him writing about homosexuality, because as you talk about sexuality, and sexuality is all over Frank's books, especially Children, God Emperor of Dune, Heretics, and Chapter House.
Yeah.
I think he wrote what he understood, but it is more and more clear to me that what he understood was not an ongoing, evolving thing that was benefiting from the people who were brave enough to share their stories in the 1970s and 80s. So I think Frank, had some antiquated, out-of-date views and did the thing that I wish most people wouldn't do, which is, if you aren't informed and you have a huge platform upon which you can you broadcast your ideas to potentially millions of readers, saying uninformed shit to millions and millions of people is so damaging and is so hard, because people might not know better. They might look up to you as an author. They might look up to you for all the reasons we look up to Frank. And that really just taints the water, taints the pool. And you needn't. You were writing an excellent book without getting into talking about parts of the sexuality conversation. And yet he made that choice. And that's the frustrating part here. The UCLA tape in particular is also really frustrating for me, because I would like to think that Frank continued to learn and continue to research and continue to be curious, as he so blatantly claims to be in all of his different interviews. I resonate with what you're saying about, maybe we'll have different views in 6 months, more stuff comes to light, more conversations are had, more perspectives are shared. For sure. I'm very much open to change. I also am interested in, it was the book, The Sexual Cycle of Human Warfare, which is a book that Frank read and recommended to people. So clearly this is something that he really liked. And from at least the synopsis, if you look at the chapter synopsis of The Sexual Cycle of Human Warfare, it looks like a breakdown of conversations from God Emperor of Dune. So I want to read that book. I want to look at it, and there I might have a better idea of, in God Emperor of Dune, where Frank would have had more perspective, where do his ideas sit, and where was he just kind of lifting from this recent book that he read? I don't know. I'm curious about that. I think that could have an effect on my opinion about all this. But for now, I think we can all say Frank had an opportunity, a really easy opportunity in UCLA, to give a better answer, to say, I fucked up, or, listen, I was basing it on modern research at the time. Now things have changed. I will write better in the future. Thank you for sharing your perspective. There's a million ways he could have answered that question better. And it said he fucked up. And I want to say that my main takeaway from all of this, and sort of the note that I would like to end on, and I say this also as someone, I was born and raised in Berkeley, California, where there were a lot of like very progressive people who moved there and like set up shop there, and that's like where I was raised. I still see people from Berkeley, from the, you know, who might be older, have perspectives that are very locked in like 1995, early 2000s thinking. And it is a problem that I see where people who identify as liberal or progressive or woke or however will just like stop. Will just like stop being open to new ideas and new conversations. I think it is worth remembering that being progressive and inclusive and being respectful to people isn't something that you just achieve one day and then you get to relax and not ever do it again. It is like
Great point. Yeah,
showing someone that you
said.
love them. You just have to keep working at it. It is a lifelong effort. It involves listening to people's stories and perspectives that are not your own. It requires learning and understanding that you do not know everything. And that also includes being humble and flexible with your own beliefs. No one knows anything. No one knows everything. So my takeaway for all of this is Frank fucked up by not doing that. Frank fucked up by not listening, by not being humble, by not learning from the people in his life like Bruce. And clearly at some point, again, he wrote some progressive stuff for 1965. Could have gone a lot further. Could have gone a lot better. So,
yeah,
folks out there in listener land, be kind. Be kind to one another. If someone shares their perspective and you don't share it, still be kind. You don't have to understand to be respectful.